Okay. So we're going to get started with Perek Tet, with the second to the last Perek within Megillat Esther. And Perek Tet really is two chapters in one. The first part of the chapter, which we'll get to today, I don't think we're going to get to the second part, is the battle that takes place. And the battle between the Jews and their enemies, it is a battle that has become somewhat controversial and has actually become fodder for anti-Semites. In fact, Martin Luther used the book of Megillat Esther as proof of the cruelty of the Jewish people and how evil they were. And he actually challenged its position of Megillat Esther within the canon of the church. How can we have such a cruel people and a story of such cruelty within the canon of the Bible? But we'll. That was just, well, if you remember, Martin Luther was a vicious anti-Semite. And this chapter and the one right before it actually is a source of a lot of great anti-Semitism. We'll deal with it as well when you look at what happens, because if you remember, within this coming chapter, we're going to be speaking about the deaths of about 76,000 people who were killed by the Jews in these couple of days. Okay, 75,000 were killed in the surrounding areas, and somewhere between 500 and 800 were killed in the capital itself. And so when you look at those numbers, you say, my God, what kind of people are this? Who will do this? We'll see, and we'll have responses for all of that as well. Let's get started with Pasuk Aleph. Uvishnemasar chodesh, and now we're already months later. Okay, this is, remember, we had last been at the 23rd day of Sivan. We are now in the month of Adar, Hu Chodesh Adar, B'shlosha Asar Yom Bo, on the 13th day of the month of Adar, which we now call Tanit Esther. Tanit Esther, one of the classic explanations, in fact, in the She'iltot of Rav Achai Gon, which was written in the 7th century. It is the very first halachic work completed after the Talmud was completed. In the She'iltot, he explains very simply that this day, which was the day of battle, is the reason we fast on Tanit Esther, meaning because when Jews go to battle, they do tshuva before they go to battle, and they fasted on that day. And in fact, this is what's called Zman Keilah. When the Jews came together to go to battle, they fasted, and therefore we fast as well on Tanit Esther, on this day of the 13th. Asher higia dvar hamelech v'dato le'asot, the time had come for what the king's rule had been to be fulfilled. Bayom asher sibru oivei hayudim lishlot bahem. It was the day on which the enemies of the Jews had assumed, had made plans. Sibru is actually an earlier form of what we'll call Sibru with a samach. Sover is to think, to plan, okay? And this is, according to the Dat Mikra, this is, by the way, Sibru, if you notice, it's with a sin and not a samach. A sin, interestingly, in the words of Chazal, is called a shin smolit, a left shin. Okay, because the dot is on the left side. So it's a sibru, it's like the word savru. The Ibn Ezra disagrees. Okay, he says, Einei kolelecha yisaberun. We have that pasuk, if you remember. All of the eyes of everyone looks to you, yisaberun, with hope. And so according to the Ibn Ezra, he says, where the enemies of the Jews had hoped to rule over them, okay, however, things were turned over. Asher yishlutu hayudim hema b'sonehem. Okay, so the opposite occurred. They wanted to rule over us. We're now ruling over them. Rav Moshe Chalab says that now everything is the opposite. Whereas the Ralbag says that now is the opposite in the sense they were planning to amass forces to attack us. We are now amassing forces to attack them. It wasn't the outcome per se, but the process was all switched over. Pasuk Bet and Gimel are actually parenthetical psukim, meaning Amar Muskar in Hebrew, we say. They're giving a little bit more explanation to what had happened in Pasuk Aleph. Nikalu Ayudim Barehem. The Jews gathered in their cities. Again, we know Nikalu, according to Chazal, means they gathered in fast to do tshuva, to prepare themselves, not only physically, but spiritually for the war itself. B'chol medinot hamelech Achashverosh, in the 127 countries of Achashverosh, lishloach yad b'mevakshei ra'atam, to go ahead and stretch out a hand against those who wanted to do evil against them. Now, it's interesting. Who are the Jews attacking? The Jews are attacking those who want to hurt them. The problem we have with this is, if you remember, and you go back to way back when, to Perek Chet, Pasuk Yud Aleph, you'll notice, and this is really the beginning of this whole question, when Mordechai had sent out his people, okay, and on those who are with me, it's on the single sheet, all of these Mikorot, if you don't want to flip that much. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says, Asher Natana Melech LaYudim, they were sending out the messengers, which the king had given the permission to the Jews, Asher B'chol Ir Ve'ir Likahel, that it's Jews in every city were allowed to gather. That's what it says, Nikalu HaYehudim, V'lamod al Nafsham, and to defend themselves, Lahashmid V'larog V'labed, to obliterate, to kill, and to destroy it, Kol Chel Am Umedina Tzarim Otam, to go ahead and kill all of those who were rising up to cause them to suffer. Taf v'nashim ushlalam lavos, also children and women, and to take all of the spoils of war. Now, that phrase that we are going to be attacking Taf v'nashim, women and children, in this battle is a very, very complicated statement ethically for us, morally for us. Why would we be doing that? The Malbim has his answer that is basically, if you look on the sheet, or you go back to Perek Gimel in Megillat Esther, to Haman's decree, what Mordechai was basically doing was using the same language of Haman's decree. Haman against the Jews said that ultimately he is going to do Avenishloch Sfarim biyad aratzim. It's pasuk Yud Gimel and Perek Gimel. El kol medinot hamelech lahashmid laharog ulabed. Same words, to destroy, to kill, and to obliterate. Et kol hayudim minar vad zaken taf v'nashim. Kill all the Jews, okay, from young to old, children and women. B'yom echad. The 13th day of Adar, Ushlalam Lavos, and to take all of the spoils. But there's an interesting difference, by the way, which is the key between what Mordechai had said and Haman had said. Haman said men, women, and children, no question about it. Mordechai said men, women, and children. Haman says Jews. However, Mordechai says, "Et kol chel amu medina hatzarim," enemies. In other words, what Haman was proposing in his decree, indiscriminate slaughter of the Jews. What Mordechai proposed was a defensive battle. Anyone who's going to try to get us, we can get them all. Now, he did include women and children. Women and children is a little complicated. The Malbim is going to suggest that if you look in this perek, you'll see we never talk about women and children. But rather in this perek, what always happens is it's just the enemy. That what we have, and this is part of the answer to those who have troubles with this slaughter of Perek Tet, the ones who were targeted were the ones who posed a threat. It wasn't indiscriminate in the least. And as a result, we have Lishloach Yad Vakshei Ra'atam. It was only the ones who wanted to cause this problem. And it may be that Mordechai never had an intent of Taf v'nashim, that in fact is the Malbim's position. Never had that intent. He was just using the words of Haman, to undo Haman's decree, he used the basic words of Haman and inverted it, v'nahafochu, to be on the other side. But it doesn't say, but it's only about enemies. We'll see there's another approach to it as well. Yeah, Elaine, you have a question?
Wait, I think I missed something before. How does, no, never mind.
Okay, Alina, yeah.
How do you, I mean, so you're saying only who's attacking you, you can attack back?
Those who pose danger, not.
How do they know?
Oh, so we'll get to that as well. There's a number of different possibilities of it. In fact, I'll jump ahead for a moment. One of the possibilities we'll see, and this is a fascinating theory from Grossman on it, is when Mordechai takes over Haman's house has also all of Haman's records. And in Haman's records, there may have been the list of his allies and all of their supporters. Grossman suggests, to the extent, and we'll see there's another place to go with this as well, that might actually be the reason why later in this parak, and I'm sorry to jump ahead, but it all fits in together, why later in this parak, Esther reports on the precise number of people who were killed to Achashverosh, because a precise number isn't really meaningful unless if you have something to compare it against. If you know there are X number of people out there who have been conspiring with Haman, and you said, this is the number we got, you now can compare and say, hey, is there still need to continue? Are there still people who are going in these conspiracies against the Jews? So it might be that they knew who it was. And by the way, this all wasn't done in secret. We've had already 8 months, okay, from Sivan all the way to Adar. We've had all of these months to also do the necessary homework on who's on what side.
But they're also saying some of the people became afraid of the Jews.
Right.
So those people could either still want to get rid of the
Yeah.
Jews, but we hide,
It
or
could
they
be.
could have actually changed.
Yes, so
they
the
stood
Malbim,
on the
right.
fence, and all of a sudden.
So the Malbim suggests, again, that there is, and again, I'm sorry, I'm not doing the normal way I do posuk by posuk. The Malbim suggests there are 2 words that we need to remember that indicate the enemy. One word is the word oyev, and the other is the word sonem. One is an enemy and one is a hater. Oyev, for instance, in this pasuk, okay, what they went ahead, if in the previous pasuk, Asher Sibru Oivei Hayudim, and Oyev is a person who outwardly exhibits his hatred. A sonem, a person who hates, is a person who doesn't do it outwardly. And according to the Malbim, and the Malbim is found on this pasuk itself, and I actually quoted it here on the sheet that I did not send to those, I apologize, who are on the call-in today, but the Malbim on the word vayaku, and they smote, there the Malbim explains that the people who were merely sonim, who were quiet, they were quiet anti-Semites, those people were not killed. They may have been demoted, they may have been persecuted in response, but they weren't killed. The ones who were subject to being killed were the people who were outwardly trying to create problems for the Jews, outwardly the people who were the enemies. Yeah.
You mentioned the concept of women and children, but it's not in the.
No.
Right. In Perek Chet, in the previous chapter, when Mordechai sends out the letter, he includes into those who will be attacked women and children. What's fascinating about Perek Tet, our Perek today, you never have women and children. So I'm going to go back into the pasuk because again, I don't want to lose the psukim. Nikalu hayudim barehem b'chol medinot hamelech Achashverosh. The Jews gathered. They gathered to prepare for war. Lishloach yad v'akshei ra'atam, and they were going to attack those who specifically wanted us, the evil against us, who wanted to harm us.
So are they one and the same with the Oye?
Because this is an explanation of the previous pasuk, yeah. In other words, this is the explanation of the previous pasuk. In the previous pasuk, we use the phrase Oivei HaYehudim, V'ish lo amad lifnehem, and no one was able to stand in front of them. Now, Ish lo amad lifnehem, says the Dat Mikra, can have 2 meanings. One, no one stood in their way to do what they needed to do. The other one was no one was able to stand due to the onslaught, that no one could, that whoever the enemies were, they fell.
Why does mine say this name?
There is a machloket in terms of what the appropriate language is. Lifnehem or bifnehem. There's the Ashkenaz, in Medinot Ashkenaz, it's normally bifnehem here.
And go back to
Okay,
the
yeah.
question I had before. How does Martin Luther King?
Not King,
Not
Martin Luther.
Martin Luther, I'm sorry. I knew what I did. Martin Luther
It rolls off the tongue.
use this against us when it shows that they didn't go after the
So,
women in the-
Martin Luther, and as part of his things, I will just quote from him. Okay,
Yeah.
it's in Luther's Werk in German, but here's the English. I am so hostile to this book and to Esther that I wish they simply did not exist, for they Judaize too much and have much pagan bad behavior. Okay, Luther was a vicious anti-Semite, okay, and which wasn't unusual in the church at that time. And when he looked at this book, if you look at the book, remember, we have our own challenges. God's name doesn't appear in this book. By the way, if those who want, Tuesday night, I'm giving a shiur about God's name not appearing in this book. It'll be an in-person, it'll only be in person, it'll be at our home on Tuesday night. Yes, it's for men and women. This is a commercial. For those who are hearing it recorded, it will probably be too late. But Tuesday night, but that will deal with it. But if you look at this book does not look like a religious work. There are so many things in this book that don't fit the norm. So, for example, even when Mordechai goes to Esther, not only does God's name not appear, but even when Mordechai goes to Esther back then, the salvation for the Jews will come from another place. Why doesn't Mordechai say God will look at? Why it's another place? It's almost like he's avoiding referring to making this into a religious issue. Okay, what is it? So when Luther's looking at this book, what's this book? This book is parties. This book is drunkenness. This book has licentious behaviors. This book has murder. Like, what kind of book is this? It doesn't sound like your typical religious expression. And as a result of it, because of course it was also the Jews and the Jews celebrating their victory over the non-Jews, it became fodder for the anti-Semites. To go back into Pasuk Bet, because we're only at Pasuk Bet and we're halfway through today. Lishloach yad b'mevakshei ra'atam, the Jews gathered to be able to attack those who wanted to do evil to them. V'ish lo hamad b'fneihem, no one was able to withstand this, ki nafal pachdam al kol hamim, because all of the nations were afraid of the Jewish people. In other words, at this point, this goes to a situation that shows this nahafochu, how things have changed so drastically. V'chol sarei hamdinot, and all of the officers of the countries, v'chashdar panim, and the satraps, v'apachot, and the pashas, v'osei hamelacha, and the stewards of the king. These were the ones. The stewards are a fascinating group. We encountered them back with Haman, who was going to have them help collect the money. The Aseret Kikar Kesef, all of the money that was going to be given to the king's treasuries. But these were the people who were the closest and serving the king directly in that sense. Now, the Tosfot Reed says that actually they were the ones who the king actually had interfaced with the people to force them to do the necessary labor for the king. They're a lower level. They're his enforcers in a sense. But when you look at this, the way things changed, okay, that you go back to Perek Gimel and you see how what was supposed to happen there in Gimel Pasuk Tet, what Haman wanted them to do versus what they're now going to do for here, they're even afraid. They were completely allied with Haman. And now even they're afraid. It's not just that they're afraid of the Jews, they're lifting up the Jews. Rav Moshe Chalab says they are giving honor to all of the Jews. The Malbim actually says, Menasim et Hayudim, doesn't mean giving honor because we're in the middle of a war. It means they were helping the Jews in this battle. Ki nafal pachad Mordechai alehem, because the fear of Mordechai fell on them. Now that's a strange phrase. The previous pasuk we said kinafal pachdam, referring to the Jews. The Jews' fear was over all of the nations of the world. What does it mean that the Mordechai fear came over them? The Mordechai fear came over them according to the first edition of the Ibn Ezra. I've mentioned this before. The Ibn Ezra published in many Sfarim, he has more than one commentary. He wrote one, and then later on he wrote another. About 1140, he wrote the first one. About in the 1150s, he wrote the second one. And in the first one, he says, listen, they knew at this point that Mordechai was so close to the king. Therefore, their fear was not just of the Jews who were going to be mounting this attack, but their fear was specifically of Mordechai, because they knew what Mordechai had access. And these people who were other officials, they didn't have that access. So they were afraid of him as well. As the Chachmei Tzarfat says, simply Mordechai was the Mishneh LaMelech. So when it comes to the nations, they're afraid of all the Jews. Right? That's the general statement. When it comes to the king's court, they're specifically afraid of Mordechai. They know that something can happen. Now, in this same point, this is where Grossman suggests that part of their fear is motivated by a recognition that Mordechai's got the goods on them. Because Mordechai has all the information from Haman's archives. He knows which people were going to be party to Haman's plans. These people know that he has the goods on him, and at any point he could just turn it over to the king, and they're in Gahak Tzoros. And so as a result, it's a fear of Mordechai, not only because of his position, but he probably has something on them. And in fact, he goes so far as he knows who was going to do what, who was going to be working with whom, where the various armies were that were going to attack the Jews, all of that. Ki gadol Mordechai b'veit hamelech. Mordechai is elevated in that king's house, v'shamo lech b'chol hamedinot, and his reputation is going out in all of the countries. Ki ha'ish Mordechai holech v'gadol, because Mordechai continues to get more and more powerful. The Malbim says there's three pieces to this. If you notice, there are three phrases about Mordechai. One, Mordechai is responsible over the palace, all of the things that happens in the king's immediate sphere. Number two is he's responsible for what's happening in the various countries. And number three, he is responsible for this battle against those who are now considered enemies of the state. Yeah.
So it's really interesting when you put into perspective Mordechai's role, take a back step, Esther takes the forefront, Mordechai's back center stage. And the focus is totally removed from Esther now. So she is at the palace. It's not her wielding power as queen. It's Mordechai.
So remember, we will get the second half of the parak. Esther is going to rise up and become full partner with Mordechai. Because what we're going to see in the second half of this parak, that it's going to be Mordechai and Esther who are going to appeal to the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, to the men of the Great Assembly back in Eretz Yisrael, to establish this holiday. And let's not forget that this is going to ultimately be referred to as Megillat Esther. And even, by the way, and this is just a fascinating piece, actually comes from modern commentary, the Chayei Adam, Rabbi Avram Danzig, 19th century and early 20th, and the Chafetz Chaim quotes him as well in the Mishnah Berurah, that we even call Tanit Esther, despite the fact that it's modeling itself after the fast of the day of the war, because remember, when Esther had everyone fast for 3 days, it was Pesach time. It's a different thing. But according to them, it's modeling after the war, but still we call it Tanit Esther because we want to show the power of an individual. Okay, we want to say that one person can fast, and one person can pray, and one person can do tshuva, and all of those appeals can go straight to God. So Esther is not in a back seat. There are different roles they have. Mordechai was always in the role of an official in the court. Mordechai's role was beyond the court. Esther's role was within the palace itself and with the king. And then they're going to join together forces representing the Jewish people outwardly. So I'm not sure. I don't think she's taking a backseat. I think they each have their sphere of influence that they have to deal with. Pasuk Hey, Vayaku Hayudim b'chol oivehem. Now the battle takes place, and the Jews kill Makat Cherev veHereg veAvdan. They hit them. It's a war. There's the sword, and there's other forms of death and destruction. Vayasu b'sonehem kirtzonam, and they did as they wanted to do. Now the Malbim says that's an important phrase. They were in control of who they were killing, according to the Malbim. They did as they wanted to do. Okay, what we're normally going to talk about, collateral damage, may not have been the same thing. This may have been very precise attacks. They were in total control. There may have been, okay, but it seems to be this is not, mayhem. This is a very precise war. And what they did when they destroyed them, the Ovdan, now, to be fair, Moshe Chalav says that the Ovdan also refers to women and children, that there were collateral damage, that this was La'abed Zichram. We're going to destroy them, meaning just like with Amalek, we have to completely destroy them, that this was everybody. He takes that approach. The Malbim doesn't take that approach. The Vilna Gaon doesn't take the approach. Many others don't take that approach. The text, pshat of the text doesn't seem to support it. In fact, the Gaon says the Avdan I don't know how ArtScroll translates that to be Avdan. It's to totally obliterate, to lose any annihilate. The Gra says, what does it mean? That they completely, even after the enemy were destroyed, they made sure there was no remnant of the enemy, that they didn't want to have an opportunity that people will remember them or worship them. If you remember, the state of Israel had this challenge with Eichmann, Yimach Shemo, that after he was killed, okay, that they didn't want to give him a burial place. And so he was cremated and the ashes were scattered over the sea so that no one would ever be able to make his burial place into something important. And so they wanted to destroy any memory of these people. He doesn't say that they destroyed families, but he destroyed any kind of memory. Now we get into details. Shushan Habiram, and in the capital of Shushan. Now remember, we've distinguished between Shushan and Shushan Habirah. Shushan Habirah is the fortress. That's the palace complex. It's on a separate hill. We know this now. Then Shushan, then the city of Susa. Over Shushan Habirah, Hargu Yudim va'abed. The Jews killed 500 ish. They killed 500 people in Shushan. Now, if you think about it a minute, 500 people in Shushan, and these are people who wanted to destroy the Jews. Shushan is not a massive place. First of all, the question comes, where did all these people come from? Okay, it's possible, some suggest, that people actually came to try to attack the palace. But we know in the stronghold of Achashverosh, which had also been the stronghold of Haman, there was a high concentration of people who had planned on killing the Jews. 500 people in one city is massive. And then we have the 10 sons of Haman. So interestingly, we have Parshandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, Vaizata, Aseret b'nei Haman ben Amdata, Tzarera Yudim Haragu. They killed the 10 sons. Now, those 10 sons, there's an interesting machloket. First of all, before I even go any further, if you notice in the text, they're written in two, it's written in two columns. All the names are in one column, and then the word ve'et, and, is in the next column. This is a style of writing, of a layout, that instead of Ariach al Gabi Levena, if you go to the Shirat Hayam in Perek Tedvav and Shmot, you'll see that the way it's written is you'll have two part lines, space in between. Underneath it, you have then in the middle, then here and out. It looks like the way you lay bricks. And you can't go straight down. You know, I'm trying to remember what the name of that thing, the Mario Brothers, you know, they jump from one thing to the next. Okay, so you're jumping from one to the next. You can't fall all the way down. Here, you go off of the name, you fall all the way down. So the Gemara says that this is really done shalote tkuma lemapaltan, that Megillah in Megillah Tet Zayin and Mubet, that ultimately it's written in the style to say, there's no way, there's no support. They're just, once you fall off the edge, you're all the way down. They're gone. This is a way for even for the layout to illustrate how they've been completely destroyed. Now, it's also interesting that it says, as Sarah ben Aman ben Amdat Haragu v'abizalo shalchu yadam, it was the 10 of them. It should have said V'aseret ben Aman ben Yudim Haragu. It should have said, if you look, they killed 10 people, and this one, the 10 sons. According to the Gemara, there were actually, Haman actually had 30 sons. 10 were killed now, 10 are going to be hanged on the tree, and 10 more are going to be impoverished, and they're going to be begging for the rest of their lives. Okay, that's the medrash on it. Okay, and part of it is, we'll see a little bit later, that they were all killed at one moment, but here they're hanged. Hanging someone doesn't kill everyone at one precise moment. People die at a different rate. As a result, that opens up those possibilities. But the simple pshat is the 10 sons were killed. The reason we're going to find them ultimately being hanged, not here, they were just killed, is just going back to like Bigtan and Teresh were hanged, and also Haman was hanged. The reasoning being that if you're a mored b'malchut, if you're considered a rebel against the monarchy, that's the punishment. It's not just being killed, it's being killed and then the body being displayed. All of this will come, and we'll see uvabizalo shalchu yadam. Now, this is important. 3 times in this parak, we will say that they didn't touch the spoils. The first time is in this pasuk. They didn't touch the spoils of the 500 people and the 10 sons of Haman. The second time, we're going to see it in pasuk Tet Vav, and the third time in pasuk Tet Zayin, that each step of the way, we're going to find that they didn't touch anything. Now, if you remember the decree was that you're able, ulshlalam lavos, you're allowed to take their spoils. So what's happening here? They didn't touch it. And 3 times it's going to be emphasized they didn't touch. This is part of the way that the Megillah emphasizes that as much as war is tragedy, the Jews made this about a bigger issue. This wasn't about property and material wealth and being able to spoil the enemies. This was about killing those who wanted to kill us. It was a defensive war. They took nothing, even though in the decree of the king, they could have taken. This is to create, again, one more difference between what Haman wanted, what the king gave him permission to do, and what they actually did.
It's also, can I point, it's also a big difference from what the opening of the Megillah is, with the materialism that's described, that Am Yisrael are not there. It's a contrast to what was the opening of the whole context.
100%. And Rashi talks about this, that this is back in the previous parak, in Parak Chet, Pasuk Yud Aleph, that this establishes the nature of the war itself, that they didn't take it. Now, it's interesting. There is in the Binyan Ariel another explanation to why they didn't take. That if you remember, part of Megillat Esther is a reenactment of Shaul and Agag. The king Shaul took from the spoils of Amalek. He wasn't supposed to take anything. Shmuel Hanavi says, "What is the sounds of the animals I hear?" And Shaul says, "I just took the best, and I'm bringing it for korbanot." And he said, and he curses him for having done so. And so the Binyan Ariel suggests that really what this is about is a repair that when Shaul, the ancestor of Mordechai, attacked Agag and left him alive, he took spoils. Mordechai, when he attacks Haman and his supporters, he touches nothing. And that's part of the piece of it as well. So they leave everything aside. Bayomahu, and then Pasuk Yud Aleph, Bayomahu, Ba Mispar Yudim, Shushana Bira Lifnei HaMelech. And now they bring the accounting, the number of people before the king. Why? Well, according to the Ibn Ezra in his second commentary, who's bringing it? It's not the Jews. It's the enemy of the Jews are bringing it to Achashverosh, and they're trying to tell Achashverosh, look how terrible these Jews are. They're trying to get to turn Achashverosh around. They're not successful in doing that. But rather, what's happening here is, according to the Malbim and others, no, this is Mordechai and Esther reporting to the king, showing, according to the Malbim, when they tell the king, look how many people were in Shushan, do you realize how extreme the situation had become, how terrible it had become, how awful Haman was and all of his plots. Look at what had to be done. Vayomer hamelech l'Esther hamalka b'Shushana bira hargu hayudim v'abeit 500 ish. 500 people have been killed in Shushana bira. Ve'et aser b'nei Haman, and also the 10 sons of Haman. Bishar dinot hamelech me'asu. I can't even begin to imagine how many more were killed in the rest of the countries. There's 127 countries. It's going to take some time for the information to arrive to the king. But he's saying, if this much, you only imagine what had happened elsewhere. Now, this is just as a side note. The Ibn Ezra points out that this is one of the places in Tanakh where we employ what's called a kal v'chomer. That if this is the case, how much more so in that case? And what I did do is, this is that one sheet that I gave you. If you want to know every place in Tanakh where we use the equivalent of a kal v'chomer, you'll find it here. But this one is actually on the second side at the bottom. It says Esther Tet 12. Okay, Vayomer HaMelech l'Esther HaMalka b'Shushana bira hargu hayudim v'abeit 500 ish v'etaser b'nei Haman b'shar medinot HaMelech me'asu. Can you only imagine if this many were killed here, how many more could have been killed elsewhere? Uma shelatech v'naten lach, uma b'kashatech od v'te'as. And he goes in and he says, what else can you possibly want? If 500 were killed here, can you imagine how many more people were killed elsewhere? What else could you possibly want? And Esther says, if I tomer Esther im al hamelech tov, I'll tell you what I want. If you find favor in the king's eyes, yinaten gam machar le'Yehudim asher b'Shushan. Give us tomorrow time for the Jews in Shushan. Lasot kedat hayom, to do just like the law of today, that aser b'nei Haman yitlu ala etz. And I want you to do one more thing. I also want you to take the 10 sons of Haman and make a clear political statement. Hang them on the tree so that everyone knows that this was a crime against you. Hanging them on the tree says that they were mordei b'malchut. No question about it. I want the extra day. Now notice where he wants the day. He wants the day in Shushan, or she wants the day in Shushan. So far, where have they killed people? Where have they defended themselves? Shushan Abira, in the fortress and Shar Medinot. It's entirely possible, using what we know today. And by the way, it's not just from that. We even find this in the Ralbag and find it in the Malbim, that it may be that there was one more stronghold. That's the stronghold of the city of Shushan and not the city of Shushan Abirah. So she's asking, I need to clear out, I need one more place to do. And he gives her the permission. And Vayomer Amelech le'asot Canaan, the king says, you can do this. Vatinandat b'Shushan, and the rule was given Shushan, v'atzeret b'nei Haman talu, and they did precisely like she had asked them. All of that took place, and now we have the final words. Vayikalu hayudim asher b'Shushan gam bayom 14 l'chodesh Adar. One more day in Shushan. Vayargu b'Shushan 300 ish. And 300 people were killed. Now there is a machloket whether the Ibn Ezra says the 300 are part of the 500. The Malbim says the 300 are an additional because they're two different locations. Shushan Abirah at 500, Shushan the city at 300. We don't know. We don't know if it's 800 total or not. Ushar Yudim, I'm sorry. Uvabizalo shalchut yadam. They again did not touch the spoils. Ushara yudim asher b'mdinot hamelech nikalu v'amod al nafsham v'noach me'odehem. And now, what happened in the rest of the Jewish people? The Ibn Ezra says, since the Jewish population was so heavily concentrated in Shushan, the rest is called Shar. It's like there's small pockets of Jews. V'noach me'odehem, and they were able to find the rest from their enemies. Varog b'sonehem, and they killed the sonehem, 75,000 uvabizalo shalchu yadam, and they killed 75,000. Now, 75,000 is a massive number. But what's interesting, if you notice, 75,000 people were killed among 127 countries, which on average is about 590 people a country. So while you never want to diminish a number of 75,000, realize the size of this empire we're dealing with. It's massive, and it doesn't seem as extreme as when you just hear the number itself. Now we have a few more minutes, and what I just want to do in a few more minutes, because we're not going to get to the next part of the parak, which is the establishment of the holiday, is I want to refer you to the handout that I sent from the Dawn. And just to read with you pieces. Now, this is from Yoram Hazoni. Yoram Hazoni is a political scientist. He is also a Talmid Chacham. He also is the founder of the Shalem College, which is a liberal arts college in Israel. He's written many fascinating things. And I'll even give a shout out. This book, The Dawn, was sent to me by a good friend, George Haynes, who, when he got it, he just loved it. And he said, you got to read this because it's an analysis of the politics of Megillat Esther. So thank you, George. But I'm just going to go through the pages briefly with some of the things. And if you look on page 226, that's the first page that I sent of this thing, the bottom paragraph. And this again addresses the deaths that occurred. The modern world is quick to decry the war against the Canaanites, but contemporary warfare has resorted to the categorical destruction of innocents for less. The counter-value warfare against Hiroshima and Dresden was not aimed at saving Western civilization or even the United States. The war had long since turned in favor of the Allies. Yet these enormities were deemed necessary to bring the war to a speedier conclusion. German children were considered worthy of destruction in order to save the lives of American servicemen. The premise of the war against the Canaanites is far less cynical, since it presumes what was clearly not the case when the decision was taken to drop the bomb, that the possibility of Jewish civilization, indeed of moral civilization itself, could not persist without the eradication of the worst level of impurity of the land. Now, he is addressing not Esther and Haman, he's addressing an even more difficult issue of why we're obligated to destroy the 7 nations of Canaan. The bottom paragraph now in 227, Mordechai's war is a war of morality, a war fought in the world and by its rules, because any other choice in this time and place would have been folly. Thus, if one were to ask why so many men had to die in the day of fighting, if the results were by then practically assured, the answer is that this is the way of politics. Without decisive action against his enemy, Mordechai would have guaranteed himself a reputation of hesitancy and mildness, a reputation which would have breathed new life into the anti-Semitism of the empire and left the king doubting the Jewish vizier's abilities. And if one were to ask why Haman's 10 sons had to die, it is wishful thinking to argue that every one of them was an active leader, was active as a leader in the camp of the anti-Semites. Rather, their deaths were sought, as was accepted in the course of warfare and politics in antiquity, to prevent Haman's enmity from leaving heirs, as well as to degrade his memory and emphasize the enormity of his defeat. Skip down to the second to last paragraph in the page. Yet harsh as is Mordechai's onslaught, he nevertheless does not demand the Jews carry on their war on a purer level than that they expected to have had waged against them. Thus, Mordechai's decree, copied more or less verbatim from Haman's, speaks of the death of children and women, as well as the approbation of all the property of their enemies, all with the intention of inspiring counter-terror in the enemy camp. When the day comes, however, the texts pointedly avoid mentions of casualties among the dependents, which were apparently minimal, repeatedly emphasizing that the Jews did not even touch the property. And all of this, if you just look at 229, then you look at the last piece, comparing it with the battles about Canaan. Bottom line is that this section, this parak in Parak Tet, has what seems to be a very cruel war. It wasn't as cruel as it could have been by decree. It wasn't anywhere what Haman had wanted to do. Haman wanted to kill Jews for being Jews. We attacked enemies who were openly hostile to us. There were people who died as well, who may not have been as guilty of it, but ultimately, what happened was a necessary action within the political sphere, and especially within what was the approach of antiquity at the time. And so all of this, when Luther says that this is a pagan approach and it's vicious and it's brutal, war is vicious and war is brutal, but the Jews at the time of Esther brought it to the level of being kirtzonam, where they had control over what they were planning on doing. We'll stop here. Next week, we'll pick up. The following week, the last Sunday before Purim, we'll finish Megillat Esther, and everyone should have a very good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi.